sleeps in the sand. How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? How many years must one man have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
That was Blowing in the Wind by Peter, Paul, and Mary. I remember listening to that song when I was just a teenager in the 60s. And I later had the privilege of seeing them twice singing that song, once in the 70s and once in the 80s. It seems like that in different times in my life, this country has been in turmoil. We were fighting a war that was not very popular back then. Today, we're finding ourselves amidst a lot of controversy. There is political unrest in this country. We're living in the middle of a global pandemic. And another black man has died as a result of hate, ignorance, bigotry, maybe even apathy. Even now, the New York Times is reporting that there are rallies and looting bordering on civil meltdown, as scenes of peaceful protests and violence are played out against the backdrop of this pandemic. Where does it all end? How many times? How many people? How do we act in mindful ways in a world that does not behave mindfully or even value the philosophy of mindfulness? It's hard to look around and find people we want to emulate. It's hard to look around and find good examples. I know throughout my life, I've always looked to people whenever I wanted to be something or to behave a certain way. I found someone who was like that. And then I tried to do what they did in order to achieve that. I want to bring to our minds today someone who has been through much of what we're going through today. Maybe even on a much closer scale, on a much larger scale, because it was so personal to him. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh. In his book, The Art of Living, Sister Chan Kong, in the foreword, says this about him. He cherishes life. Despite all the adverse conditions he has encountered over the years, including war, exile, betrayal, and ill health, he has never given up. He has taken refuge in his breathing and in the wonders of the present moment. I want to read a section in this book. It's called Please Call Me by My True Names, in which he reflects a story from his youth and how he was able to survive the things that we're thinking about, the things that we're experiencing, the things that we are seeing pan out in our world, in our country, in our cities and towns. He says, I remember one day in the 1970s while we were working for the Vietnamese Buddhist peace delegation in Paris, some terrible news came in. Many people had been fleeing Vietnam by boat, which was always a very dangerous journey. Not only was there the danger of storms and not having enough fuel, food, or water, but there was also the risk of getting attacked by pirates who were active along the coast of Thailand. The story we heard was tragic. Pirates had boarded a boat, stolen valuables, and raped an 11-year-old girl. When her father tried to intervene, he was thrown overboard. And after the attack, the girl threw herself overboard too. Both of them perished in the sea. He continues, after I heard the news, I couldn't sleep. The feelings of sadness, compassion, and pity were very strong, but as a practitioner, we cannot let the feelings of anger and helplessness paralyze us. So I practiced walking meditation, sitting meditation, and mindful breathing to look more deeply into the situation, to try to understand. I visualized myself as a little boy born into a poor family in Thailand. My father, an illiterate fisherman. From one generation to the next, my ancestors had lived in poverty, without education, without help. I too grew up without an education, and perhaps with violence. Then one day someone asked me to go out to sea and make a fortune as a pirate, and I foolishly agreed, desperate to finally break out of this terrible cycle of poverty. And I'm then under pressure from my fellow pirates, and with no coastal patrol to stop me, I forced myself on a young, beautiful girl. My whole life, I have never been taught how to love or understand. I never received an education. Nobody showed me a future. But if you had been there on the boat with a gun, you could have shot me. You could have killed me. But you wouldn't have been able to help me. Meditating that night in Paris, I saw that hundreds of babies continue to be born under similar circumstances, and that they will grow up to be pirates unless I do something now to help them. I saw all of this and my anger disappeared. My heart was full of the energy of compassion and forgiveness. I could not embrace just the 11-year-old girl in my arms, but also the pirate. I could see myself in them. This is the fruit of the contemplation on emptiness, on interbeing. I could see that suffering is not only individual, it is collective. Suffering can be transmitted to us by our ancestors, or it can be there in the society around us. As my blame and hatred dissipated, I became determined to live my life in such a way that I could not only help the victims, but also the perpetrators. So, if you call me Thich Nhat Hanh, I will say, yes, that is my name. And if you call me the young girl, I will say, yes, that is me. If you call me the pirate, I will also say, yes, that is me. These are all my true names. If you call me an impoverished child in a war zone with no future, I will say, yes, that is me. And if you call me the arms merchant selling weapons to support that war, I will say, yes, that is me. All of these people are us. We inter-are with everyone. When we can free ourselves from the idea of separateness, we have compassion, we have understanding, and then we have the energy to help. How does Thai do it? How did Thai do it then? One of the things that I know is that he followed the 5 precepts of Buddhism. You know, the way I learned them a long time ago, and the way most people, I believe, probably know them are, you know, no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants. Thai was one of those who was an innovator who Sister Chan Kong also said had a vision. She said he had this wisdom and vision for a very practical Buddhism, deeply rooted in ancient teachings, yet relevant to the needs of our time. I like to think of Buddhism in that way. Buddhism is like the sea, to borrow a phrase from Zora Neale Hurston when she spoke about love. It's a moving thing, but still in all, it takes the shape of every shore it meets. And it is different on every shore. Buddhism is like that. And one of the innovative things that our teacher Thai has done is he has taken those 5 precepts and he's made them more relevant, more applicable to today, to right here, to right now. And so as our meditation today, I want us to contemplate the 5 mindfulness trainings as he has come to call them, and as I have come to know them now. I want to read what he says about them, and then we will begin a meditation on those 5 trainings. He says, the 5 mindfulness trainings represent the Buddhist vision for a global spirituality and ethic. They are non-sectarian, and their nature is universal. All spiritual traditions have their equivalent to these trainings, which are not commandments, but practices of compassion born from mindfulness and insight. They are a way of living that embodies the insight of interbeing, the insight that everything is connected to everything else, and that happiness and suffering are not an individual matter. They express the art of living mindfully, a way of living that can help us transform and heal ourselves, our family, our society, and the earth. They help us to cultivate the best kind of adaptation that we want to pass on to future generations. The trainings are a path of happiness, and by simply knowing we are on the path, we can touch peace, happiness, and freedom every step along the way. And so I want us to find a comfortable position. And as we sit, I want you to listen as I read the 5 mindfulness trainings, and I want you to notice 3 things, and this will be the focus of our meditation this morning, and that is this. Every single one of the 5 mindfulness trainings begins with the words, aware of the suffering caused by. The emphasis here is on being mindful and being aware of the suffering that exists in the world, but it doesn't end there. The next thing that all 5 of these has in common is that he says the words, I am committed to. Once I am aware of the suffering that exists, what am I going to do about it? And the third thing that is common to all 5 of these mindfulness trainings is the phrase, I am determined not to. So as we read these 5 mindfulness trainings, I'll pause after each one, and I want you to be contemplating the suffering, contemplating what you can do, and contemplating what it is that you might ought to avoid and not do. The first mindfulness training is reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of inner being and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from fear, anger, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. The second mindfulness training, true happiness. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion, and that running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair. I am aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude, not on external conditions. And I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and reverse the process of global warming. The third mindfulness training, true love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep, long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that the body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness, which are the four basic elements of true love, for my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. The fourth mindfulness training, loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help me and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. The fifth mindfulness training, nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products that contain toxins such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, for not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, or letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. And so sit for just a few moments as we contemplate nourishment and healing. How are we going to do all of these things? They're not easily done in isolation. We must look to our sanghas, to our admirable friends, to our mentors. We look to one another for comfort. We are to each other a bridge over troubled water. Our time has come to shine. All of our dreams are on their way. We can ease one another's mind. For we are all leaves of one tree. We are all waves of one sea. We are all stars of one sky. Now is the time for all of us to live as one.
When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all. I'm on your side. Oh, when times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. When you're down and out, when you're on the street, when evening falls so hard, I will comfort you. I'll take your heart. Oh, when times get rough and pain is all around, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Sail on, silver good. Sail on by. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on their way. See how they shine. Oh, if you need a friend, I'm sailing right behind. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will ease your mind. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will ease your mind. Ease your mind.
Hey, Holland Stanley.